At Simio, we're in the business of showing you the future. Our intelligent technology gives you unprecedented insight into complex systems to identify and solve today's inefficiencies and tomorrow's challenges. The Simio solution provides a low-risk opportunity to drive transformational change. Our true digital twin models capture all the constraints, business rules, and decision logic that define the operation of your system. When powered by your data, easily evaluate unlimited scenarios and deliver optimized solutions. No matter what industry you're in, eliminate your greatest operational process and scheduling challenges with a Simio digital twin. See your future success, Simio.
Welcome everyone to the Simio Solutions Series. Today's session is counter element, new feature, and other elements, timer, monitor, etc. My name is Dan Vasilini. I am the VP of Global Sales over here at Simio, and doing most of the presenting today is going to be Chiara Bondi. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started today. First off, please be aware that today's session is being recorded for replay purposes. If you'd like to rewatch this session or pass it on along to a colleague or a friend in the future, just visit Simio's website. Something new on here today. I've been asked several times on when going to the Simio website, how do I find the Solution Series? There's a resource tab across the top. Under the resource tab is the drop down, and in that drop down you will see Simio Solution Series. That's where all of our prior Simio Solution Series webcasts as well as this one will be located. Generally, we get the webcast up in about 24 to 48 hours after we finish the session, so this session will be live or available for rewatch probably, by tomorrow or Friday at the latest. If you have a question during today's session, you should have a GoToWebinar dashboard somewhere on your screen. On my screen, it's on the right side. In that GoToWebinar dashboard, there should be a question box. That's where you can ask questions. You are muted today during the session. The best way to get questions is to type a question in there, and we will address questions as they come in. I generally try to ask the question if it's relevant to the topic that's being talked about. I'll try to interrupt or get the question asked as soon as possible. If it is more generic in nature, I will hold the question until the end. Today's session is scheduled to last about 60 minutes. We've intentionally left some time at the end to try to get some Q&A in at the end of today's session. Future sessions coming up. We have one scheduled for June and one for July. June 13th, July 18th. You can take a look at their titles there. We will be doing the same thing we've done in prior years. We'll be taking the month of August off. So June 13th, July 18th are the next two before we take a 1 month hiatus and come back in September. But mark those down in your calendar, and we will be sure to get emails out to everyone as these sessions approach. Last time I'll talk about this for this year, but in case you did not attend Simio Sync Live, or you haven't seen it yet or haven't gone back to watch it yet, on Simio Sync we have sessions that have been recorded, and you can go back and watch any of these prior sessions. Speakers were from the Management Institute, McKinsey, Northrop, Penske, and a few others to mention. Those sessions you can go back and watch at any point, and if you go to the Simio webpage, you'll see it right there to register. You can go in and watch the Sync presentations right from that point. That's it from my perspective. One thing as we end today, I will bring this back up, and I'll also bring our emails back up. But if you don't mind scanning the QR code on the right side here, and you saw it a few other slides as well, that is a quick survey from today's session as well as for future sessions. We always like to try to get feedback to try to modify these sessions to attract and to do what's best for the folks that are attending. So please click on that QR or scan that QR code and give us some feedback if you don't mind. All right, Chiara, I'll stop presenting there. Turn it over to you.
Awesome, thank you, Dan. So thank you very much everyone for attending. Just very briefly, if you don't know me, I'm Chiara. I'm a solutions engineer here with Simio, and I assist new users of the software with project development and project ramp up. So I may have worked with some of you, but my main role is to help new users with getting more acquainted and comfortable with the tool, learning as they're building their first large-scale project, so that later they can feel more comfortable and confident when building larger models. So it's nice to meet you all, and I'm very excited to be able to present with you or present to you the various element objects present in Simio and kind of explain how these can help model different locations, behaviors, help you record different information so that you can use those in your system, whatever system you might be working with, to then maybe run experiments and guide the most yourself towards the most educated decision possible for your particular facility. So throughout the entire presentation, we're going to stay with the same model where I'll be highlighting a few different elements that I'm using in the model, introducing what exactly elements are, what types of elements I'm using, how these can be used in the Simio model, etc. And if there's any questions, obviously, please type them in, and Dan just ask at any point. So first things first is understanding, what an element in Simio is. So we know in Simio to represent all of our different stations or workers, we use our intelligent objects represented in the library right here, with each object having a set of predefined properties where we can adjust them accordingly in the panel to the right or add process logic, etc. With elements, these exist not in our libraries, in our library here in the facility view, but they exist under the definitions tab right here. And so as you can see, there's a multitude of different element objects that Simio provides. Now, what these elements are model components with, similar to a server or source, they have a set of predefined properties that are allow them to behave and model whatever whatever their intended purpose is, whether that be to model a specific location in a warehouse, such as using the station element, using a particular behavior through, say, the failure element, inventory storage with the inventory element, etc. So all of these objects or all of these components then can represent specific behaviors and be referenced in process logic with properties adjusted and changed both before the model run as well as through processes. So as we can see here, we have a lot of different categories specific to various areas that you might be interested in implementing in your facility. So for example, if you're currently modeling a warehouse or are managing a lot of material availability and reordering, you might be interested in looking into our supply elements, specifically the material element or inventory element. These were discussed in a prior presentation of our Simio solution series, as well as statistic elements presented in another previous presentation. So if you want to know more about how these are being used and see how these are implemented in models, I suggest going and looking at the recording of last month's presentation for our warehousing specific elements, and then some that are recorded and saved on our website for these statistic elements. But throughout this presentation, we're going to be focusing on the general category, these more versatile elements, with specifically also highlighting the presence of a new one, which would be the counter element, and seeing how these can be used and what differences there might be between using, a station element or storage element versus maybe a rack or a server. Now, as a high level, the purpose of this model is to show how these can be obviously implemented. So for example, in this model, we're going to have a order coming into our system undergoing specific tasks in the given stations. And then at the exit of server 4, this is where we're going to be producing one of two products, product A and product B. Now, these are going to be alternating throughout the model run every hour. So we're going to be producing, focusing on product A and then switching over to product B and then back to product A every hour. But all of these are going to need to be kind of stored then, so that when we want to ship our finished product, we can ship them in blocks of, say, in this case, 5. So we can't just we don't want them waiting at our ultimately station or our combiner where they're going to get placed in pallets and shipped off. We want to wait until we have enough product to fill one of our pallets and then have that ship off. Moreover, if say we're producing, we have now produced a lot of product A, but not enough to ship, and now we're switching over, we might want to then understand, okay, where can I move this, or visually understand where this is getting stored in the meanwhile while the other product is flowing through the system. And that's the goal of this model. So for example, if I start running, we're going to see different orders coming in. And then at the exit of the server, we'll see now various queues getting populated throughout the model. We can see a count to keep track of our current product, and then see other counts. Now, to model this behavior and model the storage location as well as the visual queue of the current inventory that's available and ready, and keeping count of everything that's going on, I am using elements. Now let's go through each one specifically being used. The first one that I want to highlight is actually the storage element. Now, the storage element is used or can be used in Simio to model a capacity constrained location for holding specific entities in a discrete location. So if you don't want to model, you have entities that you don't want to wait and having them sit in a server for a specific amount of time, this can be modeled through the storage location, or the storage element, excuse me. And if I go to the element itself right here, we can see similarly to a lot of our servers, for example, the properties panel show up on the right where we can adjust different behavioral properties to specify the capacity, entity constraints, any costs, financials, as well as similar to servers, any bulking decisions if the entity cannot be stored in that station. Now, in this model, we can see now, aside from the station, as soon as we have a secondary product moving through, so in this case, we'll have product B coming in at the end of the hour, so in about 20 minutes of the model run. Those might be stored in the same sort of storage location. So we might have just one area storing all of our finished product, but we might want to then in the model understand, okay, this is all in the same location, but it's not currently available to be shipped because during this hour, we've now changed over our machinery and we're shipping product B. How can I visually represent this? What can I use to understand what is currently available and what's not? And that's where, for example, we might use the storage element. The storage element, excuse me. So this is, as you can see here, all of our elements or all of our products, we can see them showing up in two different queues, in two different locations. The station right here, which I realized right here I've named current storage, but should be named current station for less confusion. I will change that, apologies. And then this other queue that says inventory ready to ship. Now this is the physical sort of location where the objects are getting stored, whereas this is more of a logical location where I'm representing the material that's currently, in this case, ready to ship. So what this means is our different entities can be located and stored in one, station element, but could be logically placed in multiple storage locations. So for example, if you wanted to classify your different products by due date, as well as category, as well as, within each category, you might have specific fields or something similar, we can then rank those or place those in all of these different storage items or storage elements, excuse me, to then visually represent all of the individual categories. So for example, right here, we can see both of our product types, our product A and product B, currently stored in our station, in this unique individual station. However, thanks to the storage elements, we're able to better understand what is ready to ship and what is now waiting and kind of in holding before it can get shipped. So if you had multiples, we would be able to classify those and whatnot. Lastly, from all of these, we can see that, for example, right here in the station, I might be curious to see and keep track of how many products are currently available. And that is thanks to our newest and latest element, the counter element. So if I go back into here, we can see just very briefly or very quickly, I have my two different defined storage elements. And again, these are logical locations, so they don't impact our entity's physical location. And we can place individual entities into multiple storage queues or storage elements. Lastly, as I mentioned, we're keeping count of how many items are currently stored in our station, or currently placed in our station, thanks to our the newest element, which is the counter element. Now, if you have the newest version, you can also see through our Symbits a actual entire example Symbit model that dives deeper into how the counter can be used and different ways that this can be implemented into your model. But what this allows us to do is to track attribute-based counts of our entities in our particular system. So for example, I am keeping track, as we can see here, let me stop the model so that this is not grayed out and we can see it much clearer. I can see how many items are currently waiting in my station element by their entity type. So I can specify based on an attribute. In this case, I'm looking at the entity type, whether those are entities A or B, how many are stored in the station, how many are currently present in my station element. Now this is helpful because during the model run, if we're trying to get an understanding of where everything is, and specifically keeping track of how many items might be waiting for a particular resource, how many items might be waiting in a specific queue or location, this can give us a really clear visual understanding of that number in a much easier way. So before, to be able to keep count of particular products, we had to create different states or different integer states, then using model logic, add to those states and keep count. And if we were to decrease, similarly, we would have to create process logic and assign to decrease that count, which was possible. But if we're trying to make that process significantly easier, especially when keeping count of multiple products, for example, multiple items, multiple attributes, the counter element is a very, very powerful one to use. Other elements that are helpful for keeping counts, for example, ultimately is, say here, again, if I go back into our definitions, our counter is being used to keep track of how many items are currently present in the station. So that count goes up and goes down to represent those changes. But if we wanted to keep track of, for example, overall, how many items of product A were shipped, how many items of product B were shipped. That's where statistic elements come in. Now, as I mentioned, there is an entire Simio Solution Series presentation going into much more detail on these statistic elements. But what these allow us to keep track is report different items or different values and record different values throughout the run, whether those be changes of a specific state variable, tallying specific values over the course of the run, or just recording at the end of the model run and output in a much more neater fashion. So again, if you want more information on these, I highly recommend using either our help user guide to dive into those, or specifically going to our presentation on the statistic elements. Now, the final two elements that I want, or element that I want to use or highlight is, I'm keeping count of all of these items going through our system. But now one question is, okay, I am keeping, count, whatever, but what if now that count, or I want to make sure that I'm monitoring that count or that number of products, so that when I reach a specific threshold, reach a certain value, etc., I can impact the model's behavior or make decisions based on that value. Well, thankfully enough, Simio has a monitor element. So just like the counter keeps count and tracks specific attributes, the monitor element allows us to keep track of a specific state variable and monitor whether it crosses a specific state or threshold value to then impact and make decisions or impact the model's behavior, or trigger a specific event to occur, etc. So what this could look like is, just like in this example model, we might be keeping track of how many finished goods of a particular product we have, and once we have enough to package together and ship, so that we can just don't have these waiting at one other's location and cause potentially a buffer. Once we have enough, we can then ship everything together in a much more fluid fashion. But how do we know if we have enough, right? How do we just magically know when we've crossed that threshold, once we've crossed that value, once we've reached that desired number? Well, that's where the monitor element comes into play. So if we look at, for example, the properties available, I'm looking at our, finished product storage, and keeping kind of note on this specific location or this specific queue of how many items are present, and I'm just waiting until they cross specifically a specific state. So in my case, I'm just keeping track of how many products are finished and ready, and then once they've reached that specific threshold or surpassed that, the monitor will be triggered or notified to then trigger a process or notify the model, etc. In my particular case, I'll show the model again. I can see that how I have is I currently have the monitor waiting until 10 of our finished goods are ready to be shipped. So once I reach 10 items in my inventory ready to be shipped, we can see that some of them will be sent to the combiner, and then from the secondary source, we're going to create a pallet that can ship everything together. Now, the reason why some of these, for example, are still remaining is purely based on how I've set up both my monitor to check the inventory as well as the packing size, keeping track then of how many items can fit into one pack. I want to pause here and see, Dan, if there are any questions that have come up on the elements, etc., before I dive into how these can help, for example, guide decisions and specifically how I've implemented these in an experiment.
So there are some questions that popped up, Kiara, but I think it'd be best to keep going for right now because the questions seem to be more generic in nature, and I
Okay.
will we'll save them until the end for right now.
Okay, that sounds great. If there's any that are more specific, just please interrupt me. Perfect. So we've seen how a lot of these elements are being used, and specifically used in this model, you know, the storage element, the or the station element, the storage elements, the counters, the monitors, etc. Now the question might be, okay, why? Why would I use these? How are these going to help me? What is the benefit of these, etc. And there's a few benefits that I want to highlight that are for the use of these. The first one is specifically the placing of objects in logical queues to then classify these and support the classification of products. So say you are a facility that stores both fresh and shelf-stable items. Due to limited location, you might have to store those in very close or maybe even the same sort of location. And that might be represented then by the station element. However, when you have all of these different entities, you might want to get a better understanding of, okay, how many of these are my shelf-stable products, how many of these are my fresh products, etc. And that can be really tricky to visually see or represent by just one station element. So that's where the storage element can come into play. It's a lot easier then to, when searching for specific objects, we might want to search them through our specific storage location. So for example, in my process logic, I'm just going to very quickly go through here. When I'm switching or I want to specifically find a particular product, if I were to search through the entirety of our station, I would have to then add specific matching conditions, such as, oh, I need to make sure that the that I'm looking at the station, but only finding the entity of interest of this particular product type, part, etc. However, we might be able to actually ease that search by using just our specifically our inventory or not inventory, excuse me, our storage location. So we might be able through our search step, when we're looking at a queue, if we've categorized all of our different objects in different logical sort of queues or storage elements, that can make the search significantly easier because we're not searching in this much larger location. We're now specifying down which storage or which queue basically our objects are stored. So this can make searching for particular items a lot more efficient because we might, instead of having to search through, say, a queue with 500 different entities, if we've classified those in different storage locations, we can narrow down to say, oh, just look through this specific storage location. And that could ease down the search from 500 items to only 100, making the model run in a much more, or that search much more efficient than just searching through everything. The monitor element, for example, can be used again to keep track of when specific values go above or below a threshold. So for example, if you want to plan for inventory replenishment, you might use a monitor to keep track of when your inventory levels dip below a specific amount. Or if trying to keep track of costs, for example, when those financials go above a specific threshold. In my case, I'm trying to keep track of how many items are ready to be shipped so that I know then, okay, I have enough to fit in a particular box or on a particular pallet so that I can ship those to my ending destination. That could be another warehouse, that could be direct to consumer, that could be to a store, etc. And another great use of, for example, specifically the monitor element can be then to experiment and play around with, okay, what is that threshold? What is that value that I'm looking for, etc. So we can now use these elements to support the creation of experiments, and then using, for example, the counter or statistic elements to report key indicators to then guide our decisions. So what does that look like? So I've created a few experiments where I'm trying to understand through my monitor element and keeping track and visually counting and understanding, you know, how many products are ready to ship and how many I have available on hand. Understand, okay, what would be the ideal threshold and then shipping size to ensure I can ship the most amount of packages, and on average, I don't overflow my station, right? We don't want to have just keep everything in our inventory and allow it to basically overflow, because then that can make operations a lot trickier because we might have too much material to look through. If a product is sensitive to timing, for example, and could expire and is not shelf stable, we might want to be a lot more cautious of how much we're currently storing so that we don't allow anything to expire or run out, etc. And as well, keeping track again of other discrete numbers such as packages getting shipped, costs, etc. So through these elements, we're able then to create both controls for our model to run, as well as responses to compare against. So in this case, for example, if I run the model and I start to see, okay, you know, if I'm keeping track how many products are ready, you know, is it better to have our packing size and threshold super similar to each other? What if I wait longer before shipping and ship just larger or pallets with more product in there? Is that going to be more beneficial than if I ship smaller packages, but maybe more frequently, right? So we can start to see here, for example, how if we ship, say, packages with more product in them, we're actually, you know, shipping less product, we're shipping fewer boxes, and we have much more product in our station. Now, again, that might be great moving forward because that means we might have more storage or more inventory for following days, etc. But if that's not shelf stable and we know that it expires quickly, that could then go to waste and could cause a financial loss on your system or on our end. And so that is where the use of these elements can be really, really powerful, is being able then to, in a much more visual and easier to sort of comprehend manner, model these behaviors and these events to then keep track, to visually represent all of these different stations, and add that layer of complexity to your system that might be missing without them. So, you know, keeping these locations, for example, discrete or separate, so that we can then understand better, okay, all of my different product categories, here's how many I have available per product, etc. Perfect.
Sorry, let me give you a couple minutes to breathe here, and I'll ask you a couple of questions as they're coming in.
Yep.
All right. First question I can actually answer. So the question was, is this model going to be available to see how the things are applied to it? So how the elements are applied to it. So the answer is yes. We for anyone, if you ask that question or if you're watching this session on record, yes, we generally upload any model that has been presented into the webcast area. So generally, when you go to that resources tab and you go to the Symbios Solution Series web page, If there is a model associated with it and it's something that's available to you, we'll have the link to the webcast, and then we'll have a link to download the model. So I believe Kiara has already shared this model. So yes, you should be able to get this model after the session.
Mm-hmm.
All right, question for you, Kiara. Are you able to display the parameters of a monitor element in the facility view?
To display the, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, are you able to display the parameters of a monitor element in the facility view?
I guess the question would be what parameters you would want to have displayed, right? So in this case, for example, if you wanted to display or see exactly the count that the monitor is keeping track of, that would be things displayed with the counter element instead. So if you wanted to visually see, for example, the count of a particular product and then understand if the monitor itself is working or not, you would be displaying the value that you're keeping track through the counter element in the facility. So in this case, for example, when wow, sorry about that. Here we go. So for example, if we wanted to visually see from this queue or this particular location, how many products are in this, for the monitor element, sorry, and keep track of how many items are ready, when we're looking at here, when I start the model run, we can see here we're keeping track of how many products are ready to ship. So we can see here that when I have my threshold set to 10, which is a model property right here that I've defined, I can see that as soon as these hit 10, or just before they hit 10, because it reaches 9, and then the minute that the 10th arrives, the monitor kicks in and gets notified, we've reached our threshold. Let me now execute whatever process you want me to execute, create whatever entity you want me to create, etc. So in that sense, yes, we can definitely create and visually represent the properties that the monitor is keeping track of to then visually be able to see, oh, the monitor is working or not. If that doesn't answer your question, please follow up with an email, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll let you keep going, Kiara, and I do have a list of other questions here. We'll get to at the end.
Perfect. One element that I actually have not discussed about yet, and it's the last element that's present here, is the timer element. So as I mentioned, in this model, we're changing every hour the product that we are producing. So every hour there's going to be some sort of changeover occurring where we're switching from product A to product B. And all of these times, here we go, sorry about that. That time interval, for example, we might have a very specific sort of alarm clock, if you want to think about it that way, that we want to follow. You know, every 6 hours, we must undergo a specific change, process, etc. Now, the way that we can model that is through our timer element. Now, the timer element is a very helpful element, and it's the last one that is present in our general category, and can be used kind of as an alarm clock to fire or trigger specific events or processes. So again, say you have something that occurs at a particular interval, or you want a event to occur after a specific amount of time has gone by, etc. We can use the timer element to define that interval, offset, etc. to basically trigger, again, I like to think about this as an alarm clock where when it goes off, we either trigger a specific process, we notify maybe a specific piece of equipment or worker to complete a task, etc. And again, similar to all of the other elements that we looked at, as well as all the standard objects in the facility, we have all of these different properties that we can use to define and modify its behavior. So say you only want this to occur once, we can change the number of events of times that this timer can go off, define an offset and interval, so how long to wait for this first timer to go off, and then once it does go off, how often or how long to wait between each time. And lastly, we can actually have this set up to follow a specific time interval or distribution if you know that, on average between 2 and 4 hours, a specific event occurs. Follow a timetable. So if you want, say, to follow a specific schedule for this timer to go off, that can be defined as well. Following event counts. So every time, for example, that your monitor goes off, right? So that's a great thing about these elements as well, is we can actually have them interconnected. So say after you want actually every 5 paddocks, every 5 pallets shipped, you want to switch products, we can use the timer element to then be fed the information from the monitor, and basically through those two communicating, where the monitor is keeping track of every time it gets kicked off, we might have the timer then notify our system to trigger another specific behavior. So that's another great way to use these elements, is you can use these across each other as well to communicate and make decisions on how to behave based on counts, events, etc. And so with that said, these were all the general elements that are available to you for your models. There's a lot of other information both in our help guide as well as a lot of great SymBits that dive deeper into each individual element. The newest one is the counter SymBit. I highly suggest all of you to go check that out and see how that can be implemented in a multitude of ways. If you want to see other presentations on other elements, again, last month's presentation on warehousing utilizes some of our warehousing specific elements. And then we do have a specific Simio presentation on statistic elements that's saved on our website that I recommend you all check out. But with that being said, thank you so much for listening. And now to dive into all of your questions.
Perfect. Thanks, Kiara. And as Kiara said, if you do have any questions that we are not going to ask here, please type them into the question box if you haven't typed them already. After Kiara is finished answering these questions, I will bring the slides back up and just flash my email address as well as her, just in case you do want to get a hold of one of us and your question was not answered in its entirety. All right, I've got about 5 or 6 questions here. We'll see how many we can get to, Kiara, and we'll see what we can get through. First question, would the key expression on the counter element work more efficiently than the visibility expression on a queue?
Would the key, so the key expression in a counter element is the attribute that you're using then to separate when you're keeping count, for example, of multiple objects, being able to display the visual. So it's a much easier to see a number, for example, and get that understanding than when you visually see a queue with a lot of different entities in, especially as these get bigger and bigger. But I don't know if can you repeat the question so I can?
Yeah, would the key expression on the counter element work more efficiently than the visibility expression on a queue?
I would say yes. The reason for that is because the larger a queue gets, or the more items are present in that queue, you can get an understanding of, overall there's a lot or not a lot of product, but that key value in the counter can give you the exact number that is currently there. So when it comes down to understanding how many products are in a specific queue, and you really want to get a much more detailed value, yes, I believe that the the key expression in a counter element would be much more helpful than just the visibility of a queue.
Perfect. All right, could you describe the differences between the storage element and the station element?
Yeah, so the storage element is, think about it as a physical location, whereas the station element is a physical location. Let me change that name. So the station element is a physical location, whereas the storage is a logical queue. So the way that I like to think about this is the station might be like the actual physical, say, shelf that you're putting all of your different product in. But maybe when you're organizing objects in a shelf, you have them categorized in sections. So for example, I keep all of my plates and bowls in the same shelf. So that could be the same station. So they're all physically there. However, logically, I separate them by bowls, large plates, and small plates. So those individual logical sort of locations are represented through my storage elements, where they're all placed in the same physical location, but logically, it's a manner of organizing them differently. So this then allows me, when I'm searching for a particular object, in this case, maybe a plate, like a small plate, I know where the station is, which is that same shelf, but thanks to that organization, I know exactly where to look because I know that it's organized in a logical queue represented, for example, by, in this case, my small plate storage section. So that would be the main difference between the two, is one is a physical location and your entity can only be in one station at a time. So it can only be placed in one individual location. Whereas when it comes to the storage, it could be placed in multiple logical queues. So it might be placed physically in one area, but logically, thinking about categorizing them, it could be placed in multiple locations.
All right, perfect. Thank you. All right. Do you have a recommendation for when to use storage/station element versus holding entities in a server with infinite processing time and transferring as needed?
I think the best reason, or the best reason to use station and storage is twofold. One, when it comes to analyzing, for example, results and outputs, it's significantly easier to utilize in our results tab, for example, navigate to the actual, what's it called, our different stations and storages and get that information there for any statistic or number of items waiting, time, etc., throughput versus maybe the amount of information available for the server. We could get more detail. But I think the most helpful reason for this is, again, when it comes down to potentially accessing the objects present in a location. It's a lot easier through process logic to search through smaller, say, storage queues than it is to just search through the entirety of a processing station of a server. And then when trying to release the objects, it can get a little bit trickier to release the server object and then transfer it from free state over into another object, and referencing and making sure that any seized object or other resource from the server is now released. So that would be really, I think, the benefit of using a station/storage element over an infinite capacity server.
Okay. All right, we have a couple minutes left here. We'll try to get to maybe one or two more questions, and then I'll grab screen control back. What recommendation? What would be the best way to incorporate these elements into existing model with previous modeling approaches? Do you have any suggestions or recommendations on that?
Yeah, so I would suggest the best, for example, to implement and the easiest to implement in a pre-built model would be the storage elements as well as the counter elements. Because the storage elements, again, being logical queues, and you're not physically moving the entity around, you'd be able, through process logic, to insert and remove through the insert step and remove step your different entities into these queues to maybe represent, oh, this is currently in transit versus this is currently available. So for example, say you have a line where you have product going from, server 3 all the way through server 15. You might be then curious to be able to see or understand, okay, how long does it take for items to go from one server to another? You might then insert them into a logical queue of, in transit storage, for example, when they enter server 3, and then have them exit that queue when they exit server 50. And that can then provide also through the results, for example, as we can see from the queues, the time that they're staying in that station, number that they're staying in that queue, etc. So we can get that level of detail. And then the monitor, or the counter element, can be just used to then keep track or visually see, for example, the number of, say, those same orders entering and exiting that particular section of your line.
All right, let's try one more question here. Can I use counter elements in constraint logic to block entities from routing based on the queue size?
Can you use counter elements? I believe you can. I would need to get back on that just to confirm on that. But I believe, yes, that's possible.
Okay.
I'll get back to the user who asked that with a much more in-depth explanation.
Okay. All right, no problem. Let's do this then. Let me grab screen control back, because I want to see if I can actually make this work, because I had a lot of complaints or a lot of comments that my screen wasn't showing full size last time, which I don't know why. I don't know what issue I was having with my PowerPoint. So I would like to show again and see if it works this time. All right, can you confirm you can see that this time? Is it cut off or anything on your screen, or does it look okay?
It looks fine by me.
All right. Maybe who knows what that first glitch was. All right, so to wrap up today's webcast, once again, if for some reason my screen at the beginning had some problems, here are the emails for both myself and for Kiara. So if you do want to reach out and ask questions on this webcast, or if you're watching on a recording and something pops up, please feel free to reach out to one of us and we'll get back to you. If you did ask a question today during the session and we didn't get it answered, please don't hesitate to send that question into one of these two email addresses. At the bottom of the screen is that QR code that I had talked about. If you can scan that QR code and give us some feedback on today's session, that would be greatly appreciated. And let's try one more thing here. See, look at that. It says my screen is not paused. I'm not sure what's happening with my PowerPoint today, but we'll end things here. Thanks everyone for attending today. We appreciate your attendance. Our next two sessions, as I mentioned at the beginning, June the 13th, July the 17th or 18th, I believe it is. Well, let me just confirm that date, even though I'm not going to show it. I'm going to confirm it. Yeah, July 18th. June 13th, July 18th are our next two sessions. Please sign up for those sessions.
Apologies. Just very quickly, for the last question of routing logic, and if it can use the counter element, yes, you can. And actually, in our latest SimBit, there's an example of that.
Perfect. All right. All right, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Oh, look at that. I don't know what's going on with my screen today. We'll get this fixed for next time so we don't have these little bit of bugs that I have. So maybe the debugging next time will help my actual PowerPoint presentations versus just the debugging Simio models. So thanks everyone for attending today. We appreciate it. We will see you in about a month. Kiara, thanks. Good job. Bye all.
Thank you, everyone.